Hi guys, I'm John with CheatSheetPros.com, and I'm a huge Kansas City Chiefs fan, as you can tell, and today we're going to pound the Bears. Well, I hope so, otherwise this video is going to look pretty silly if we get beat. So today we're just going to talk about some do's and don'ts in your lineup building process for daily fantasy sports. So let's go ahead and get started with some of the do-nots. So don't try to make a lineup with every single player you like on the slate because you're not going to be profitable. Another do-not: don't spread yourself too thin. You don't want to try to get one lineup with one team stack for every team across the slate because you're not going to be able to compete in a large field GPP. The major do not, and I see people do this all the time, even though some of you might think that it's basic, don't go into a 150 max contest with 5 lineups. You might cash, but you're not going to win because you have pro DFS players that are in there and they might be game stacking 20 lineups with every game on the board, and you're not going to be able to compete with them because when you get down to the end, the lineups that you have to make you contrarian, they're going to have that, plus they're going to go a lot deeper. So if you're going to do a max entry contest, that's fine. I understand that's where the big money is, but you want to fade the chalk. So take the contrarian play, stack the craziest thing you could possibly think of, because you don't want to go in there with chalk plays because you are not going to win. To give you an example, on DraftKings today, there's a $1 $250,000 prize pool contest, and there's 297,200 entries. So you have to think, what can you do to beat those other 297,000 people? That's hard to do, especially when first place is such a massive prize, but when you get down to 7th place, you're getting sometimes 20 to 50x your buy-in, which is not that good. So in a big GPP, you want to be contrarian and you want to think outside the box when building your lineups. Now, some of the things you can do to make yourself successful: look for the single entry GPPs. That way the playing field is level. That way, if you want to play some chalk, yes, there will be some chalk in there, but you're a lot better off when you're trying to compete for the big picture. Another thing you can do is don't use default projections in a large optimizer like Fantasy Cruncher. Fantasy Cruncher is probably one of the most popular fantasy sports optimizers that people are using right now, and I know there are several people that go in there and they just run 20 lineups and they enter them. A lot of people are doing that. I would guess it to be in the hundreds, maybe even the thousands. So don't use the default projections, and we'll go over how to make your own custom projections, or at least spin it to where you get something a little different. Another thing that we can do, the larger the field, the more contrarian plays. We've already talked about that. So you have to determine the sport that you're playing, is stacking a viable option. So in NFL, if you're playing a GPP, you have to stack. And if you're new to DFS, what I mean by stacking is taking a quarterback and then using a wide receiver and or a tight end on the same team, so that way if the QB throws the touchdown to the wide receiver, you're getting points for the QB and you're getting points for the pass catcher as well. That's usually what wins GPPs. If you want to do a larger stack, you could run it back on the other side with another wide receiver. So for example, you would take Team A with their QB, wide receiver, tight end, and then take the opposing team's wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 and use that as a game stack and hope that game shoots out, possibly goes into overtime, or becomes a back and forth game where you're going to accumulate a lot of points. Now, stacking is not as viable in NBA unless you're doing game stacking. If there's a 2, 3, 4 game slate in NBA, I love to game stack. That's the easiest way to do it. It takes a lot of the thought process out of it for me. So that's something to look at and consider. Also, enter your cash games with your GPPs. So if you're just playing GPPs, you're going to burn through your bankroll pretty quick. Now, a lot of people will get in our chat group and they'll say, hey, I keep losing money, I keep losing money. So I ask them, well, what are you playing? And most of the time they say, oh, I'm playing the $1 GPP or the quartercade. Well, it's hard to cash a GPP. About top 10% of the field are going to get stuff back, but that means 90% of the field's not going to get any money back. So really look at your double ups, your triple ups, your cash games, some head-to-heads. As a rule of thumb, if you want to kind of hover even while you're playing GPPs, if that's what really gets you excited, put 50% of your bankroll into GPP and 50% into cash games like single entry double ups. And when you're doing double ups, They have the single entry and then they have the mass multi-entry. So make sure on DraftKings especially you're paying attention to the single entry double ups. I know in NFL every week there's 2 or 3 $5 double ups that are single entry, and there's somewhere between 6,000 and 9,000 players. That's a good place to put your $5 if you want to double it up, and then take $5 and go put them in $1 GPP lineups. Now, one of the biggest things I want to talk about is I call it drawing a line in the sand. So when I'm talking to friends about fantasy sports and entering lineups and taking shots at GPPs, you want to have a core. So yes, if you like 10 different QBs on Sunday, don't try to do 10 different lineups, one with each QB, because you're not going to be profitable, because the one lineup that hits, you can't get it high enough in a GPP to pay off those other 9 entries that you're going to miss on. So what I recommend is taking a core of 3 to 5 players, especially for NBA. Do at least 3, 4 is recommended, 5 if you really like them, but find a core group of players, put them into an optimizer if you're doing, I'd say 10 to 20 lineups or more, and run it with somewhere between 25 and 75% exposure. Personally, I like to do 50% exposure, so that way I have my core group of players, and then when everybody's looked on DraftKings where you've got it and you see your little dots moving across the top, if your core is doing well, that whole group of players is going to do well and start moving up to the top. And the best part about that is if you get to the top end of that, if you're in the top 10, top 20%, and your core has done well, you're going to have several different players who could spin you up a little bit higher to maybe take down that GPP. So look for a core group of players, and one of the most beneficial things about having a core group is if your core does good, you're going to get a lot of those 20 lineups across the money line in cash. To give you an example, on NBA, if you have 3 to 5 players locked in, and let's say they all hit 5, 6, 7x value, out of those 20 lineups, you're probably going to cash 12 to 15 of them, so you're going to be profitable just by getting your core over there. Also, it's a lot less players that you have to follow. And then you can look at the lineups that are at the top. Of course, you're going to have some stragglers at the bottom of players that missed, but it's going to give you a wide range of options to go down there for that GPP. Another couple quick things I want to hit on is use Twitter. There's a lot of beat writers for individual teams that will tweet different things, injuries, maybe the plane arrived late, maybe Kansas City didn't get their luggage when they were in New England, it went to New Jersey, but it got there 2 hours before the game. Also look at last minute injury news, like today, and what's today, Sunday the 26th of December, Joe Mixon I just saw has a stomach bug. So maybe Joe Mixon is chalked today, and you see that beat writer wrote that he's got a stomach bug. I saw it on Fantasy Alarm. Then maybe you fade him hoping that the stomach bug's going to affect his performance, and you go another route. So again, these are just some basic lineup building processes. We'll have a lot more videos coming in 2020 on how to specifically build lineups, but I wanted to just hit the quick do's and don'ts for the beginning DFS player, and go Chiefs!